thanks from Jim and me as well for sharing your day with us. It's a pleasure to be here. A little bit of my background so you know where I'm coming from. Librarians in the room. If the MLS counts, I'm one of those too, but after I got out of library school way longer ago than I'm going to talk about, I ended up more by happenstance than design with companies primarily for a long time book selling to academic libraries, including this library. Then worked for some journal vendors. 4 years ago, not quite, I joined BioMed Central, and my talk is going to give some history of BioMed Central, as well as some broad background, what I'll call environmental view and history of open access in general, just to kind of set the scene. For some of you, this may be plowing new ground. For some of you, this may be just a reminder of things you already know, and I hope it's not too rudimentary to be of interest to you. So let's look at open access in general, going back as far as the 1960s. In some specific disciplines, there were people talking about why can't we take our content and open it up more, but it was, they were kind of outliers. These were conversations largely going on within just certain small groups of certain researchers or within certain societies. Bring that ahead to the year 2000 where BioMed Central was launched, and we were essentially the first large-based commercial publisher of peer-reviewed scholarly open access journals, and I will go into what all that means in a few minutes. A couple years later, one of the first big international open access statements of intent and making an open access a real international initiative happened in Budapest. And that really raised the visibility of open access even more and took it from this kind of, gee, interesting idea, I wonder if it'll fly sort of notion to being something that started bit by bit to become a little more mainstream. 2003, Public Library of Science, also known as PLOS, was launched. It has become a significant publisher in the open access environment. In the mid-2000s, the National Institute of Health initiated a significant mandate that said if we are funding your research above a certain level and that research produces published results, those results must be made openly accessible through PubMed Central at the very least within 12 months. For us, that was no problem when we published articles by NIH authors because we're an open access publisher, but it created some interesting challenges that in some cases with some traditional publishing houses is still being dealt with, because if you work in a subscription-based environment and are not used to making your access openly available to everybody, either within 12 months or sometimes ever, this can be kind of a challenge. In 2009, Springer, which is one of the largest sci-tech medical business publishers in the world, purchased BioMed Central and launched its own open access initiative called Springer Open. This is significant, I think, at two different levels. One is if you've got a traditional subscription-based publisher, and Springer goes back 150 years. This is a powerhouse publishing organization that buys BioMed Central. One of two things is going to come of that. Either they're going to shut us down and try to bury the whole open access movement. Thankfully, it didn't happen. Or it is, as turned out to be the case, a statement on their part that said, we have to learn how to embrace this, because whether we as traditional publishers like it or not, open access publishing is here to stay, it's going to grow, and we can either get on this train and maybe try to lead it by acquiring one of the preeminent open access publishers in the world and bringing their expertise in-house, or we can try to ignore this, and clearly they didn't want to. At the same time, they launched Springer Open. They have several years ago established a policy that virtually all new journals being launched by Springer are going to be open access under Springer Open. Now that's another major watershed event, that you've got this traditional subscription-based publisher saying, from here on out, here's our growth path. And I'll go into some of the reasons why that took place. In 2013, we now live in an environment where the British government, the Australian government, the Office of Science and Technology Policy out of the White House, other governmental agencies are starting to create mandates that are growing and becoming more significant, essentially saying what the NIH said a half a dozen years ago, and that is, if we're using taxpayer funds to fund your research, we have a right as representatives of that public to expect that the published results are made openly available. And some of them define that as within 12 months, within 2 years. But the fact is, there's now this, especially in those areas of the sciences and medicine where federal funding, whether it's US federal or other governments, drives a significant, huge amount of what's being published. These are significant watershed events that say to all of us, whether we're publishers or students or researchers or librarians, that the environment that we've gotten used to over the years is changing and is going to continue to change. So what is open access? Well, it says that information should be open and accessible. Fair enough, that we have the technological means to make content available to people on an open basis in a way that in the print world was not possible, because those were finite physical objects that could only be shared in other as physical objects, as photocopies, as interlibrary loan lens. The electronic environment changed that significantly. It is a new business model. It's not a new editorial model. So for those of us who are trying to go about this the right way, and I'm going to put aside for now the whole reality that there are certain predatory publishers out there who are trying to cheat the system, they don't count. But for those of us who are real businesses trying to do this, what we're saying is that the customer now is the researcher to whom we are providing publishing services, rather than the library to whom we are providing subscription-based content delivery. But the editorial basis underlying this, that it is scholarly, it is peer-reviewed, has not changed. In our case, and for a number of other publishers, the author retains the rights to their work under some forms of CC licensing, Creative Commons licensing. In our case, it's CC0 and CC BY, and what that means is that the CC BY says to the author, understand that we're making your content available to anybody out there to reuse as they see fit, as long as they do not change the content itself, and that they cite attribution correctly. And we're also saying that you own the right to do anything you want with the content under those same provisions, which means you can post it to your institutional repository, you can put it on a personal website, you can send it via email to 10,000 people all over the world. As long as people understand we were the publisher of it, you have every right in the world to share this as you see fit, and we're not going to restrict that. And that's different than traditional based publishing. I published articles as a librarian with certain presses who have said at the get-go, oh, by the way, if you want this published in our journal, you assign all the rights to us. and we get to determine how it's reused, if it gets reused, and if there's a revenue stream tied to that, we get the revenue. So we've taken that away. CC0 says, and this is a very recent development for us and for other publishers, says that we also are encouraging you to make your backup data openly accessible. Let us post your data, and let us do it under the same provision that you have with the article itself. Let it be searchable, let it be reusable, let it be repurposed, and make it available to fellow researchers. And the agreement that governs that is called a CC0 waiver. We, like a number of other publishers, automatically submit everything that we publish, and that's now in excess of 165,000 articles, into PubMed Central. So whether the content is found on our site directly or going through Google Scholar or going through PubMed Central, what we've said to researchers is we don't care if you got NIH funding or not. Whether you did or not, everything goes into PubMed Central. You're covered. You have fulfilled the mandate. And as governmental agencies around the world define what other repositories items have to be deposited into to meet these new mandates, we've already said to our researchers, that's fine. We're more than happy to accommodate that. So again, the underlying shift that we're seeing is that publishers, instead of packaging content and focusing their interactions and sales activities with libraries, saying buy these packages, frequently with dwindling dollars, we're now saying you're important, but the real transaction is between the authors and with us as a publisher, which means that the basis for us deriving revenue has changed, and I'll go into that more in a bit. And with Springer Open, we're now no longer, as an overall organization, just publishing in biomedical and life science areas, but now in math and statistics, in physics, in business and economics, in a growing array of other disciplines, so that some researchers who in the past may have said, open access is great, but I'm a computer scientist. Nothing I write's ever going to be tied to any open access journal that I've ever heard of. Now that is starting to change. And I'm sure Jim, when he gets to talking about SAGE, is clearly going to be talking about things happening beyond the biomedical areas. So what drove open access? Well, on the researcher side, changes in technology and the impact of email and the web and social networking, it didn't take long for people who like to collaborate on things and like to know what fellow researchers are doing to say, why do we have this means where I can share so much personal information? I can email people all over the globe. I can go to websites. Why is the formal content that I produce not included in that environment? Why do I have to ask permission to use that in that same environment to send to other people? And publishers started to get a tremendous amount of pressure from researchers saying, you got to open this up. There also is clearly, and this is nothing that's going to surprise any of you in the library, where you've got on the one hand this expanding revenue base for funding research and this shrinking, dramatically shrinking economic base for making that research available. Journal inflation goes up and up and up, and collection development serials budgets remain stagnant or go down. And what starts happening is that without something to change the model, it's clear that a whole bunch of stuff that is worthy of being disseminated is not going to be done so through libraries because the money just isn't there to fund it. Changing view of authors' rights, where authors started finally standing up and saying, wait a second, why do we automatically have to assign our rights over to the publisher? Maybe we have to rethink that. and the rise in other open movements. So there's open science, there's open data, there's open repository movements. This kind of fits into a general new generation of researchers who are looking at the world more globally within their own discipline and in general, and sometimes even for altruistic purposes, saying in some cases, research like mine may actually save lives. Why should we limit to whom that information can be disseminated? And of course, underlying all this is the ever-present chase for new grants and tenure that says nobody's going to publish less. That everybody in the academic and research environment, whether it's public or private, is going to keep producing research because that's the lifeblood of the world that they live in. So what drove it on the publisher side? Well, again, this acute awareness that these changes in the research environment, the shrinking library funds that said, let's face it, folks, there's less and less we're going to be able to sell in the current economic model. The quest for a more rational business model, in fact, open access publishing, because your revenue tends to rise in direct relation to whether you're doing more or less work, counting on the number of articles that you're processing. It actually means that each journal can in its own right be self-sustaining in an open access environment, where in a subscription environment you may have very specialized journals that simply cannot survive without, like brain research, charging tens of thousands of dollars a year, or like some other very specialized humanities journals that may have to siphon off profits from some other very popular journal in order to cover the fact that these journals in and of themselves are never going to fund their own way. Open access tends to address that more effectively. And there was, on our side at least, a willingness to experiment, and it proved to be something that was pretty worthwhile. What all this represents is that for us to stay alive in the open access environment, we assess the authors, in our case and in most cases, after an article has gone through successfully the peer review process, a one-time article processing charge. And generally APCs, as they're known, can range from, in some publishers, $600 or $800. They probably average somewhere around $1,500. They can go as high as $2,500, though there are extremes at both ends. And what this shows from this study is that at least in the disciplines, if you can read at the bottom here, that this orange color here is the, actually it's this gray color here, is the percentage in these disciplines of people who are actually using personal funds to pay these article processing charges. And that in most of the disciplines where open access has had its beginnings anyway, that people have successfully been able to use grant funds, campus funds, departmental funds to cover the costs. And I just saw within the last 2 days that the Wellcome Trust in England just established an open access fund that goes with some mandates that are coming down from the British government to help pay article processing charges. The idea is not to penalize authors, it's simply for us to be able to derive enough revenue to provide those publishing services, and at the other end, make everything openly available without somebody having to pay a subscription charge. So what's transpired? Well, the number of publishers participating has grown significantly. The number of open access articles and the percentage of articles that appear in scholarly journals as open access has grown. There are now over 300 different kinds of mandates that are driving open access in different disciplines in different geographic regions. There are now experimentation taking place from folks like PeerJ and eLife about how to take the open access model and now start retweaking it to see if there are other models within that that might be doable. And we're now starting to see the outliers, the crooks show up and try to make a fast buck out of this by convincing sometimes pressured, sometimes naive researchers into believing that if you just quickly write us a check, we can get you published in a matter of weeks in an open access journal, and oops, they find out later that it really wasn't peer reviewed and they haven't done their reputation any good by being associated with that particular publisher or that particular journal. And in every business enterprise, I don't care whether it's publishing or having an academic institution, because we've seen that with some of the for-profit folks, that if you have an enterprise that is a good going concern, you will eventually be rewarded by finding people who are predatory, who show up and try to take advantage of that. And open access publishing is no different. We now have on the BioMed Central side almost 260 journals. Springer Open has over 150, so combined now over 400 journals in an expanding array of disciplines. We've published over 165,000 peer-reviewed articles since 2000 under this model. We are expecting this year to receive for peer review somewhere around 60,000 submissions, over half of which will not be published and will be sent back for revision, rejected outright, or sometimes with the author's permission sent to another journal for evaluation if the fit is better there. We now have 500 institutional members. We're one of the open access publishers that offers an institutional membership. And we are expanding beyond impact factors to experiment in new things like altmetrics, open data, linked data, medical trials databases, tracking case studies, and open peer review. And this is quickly from PLOS, looking at some of us in the quote-unquote major players, just the rise of open access publishing. And what this shows is that cumulatively, open access publishing now accounts for somewhere around 12% of everything that has been published in a peer review environment. And there's been a study done that says that within 2 years now, in certain disciplines, half of what's been published in those disciplines now is accessible in an open access environment. Now that may not necessarily mean that it was initially published by an open access publisher, but has extended beyond an embargo period and become available, so that it now at least is available through things like PubMed Central to the research and lay community that wants to have access to those items.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming out this afternoon. It's a beautiful day in Boulder, and I've been sitting outside and enjoying the leaves changing and just the gorgeous weather. So thank you all for inviting me here today. Going to talk a little bit about Sage Open, which is Sage's first foray into Gold Open Access, which Bob didn't touch on, but what we're both talking about here is Gold Open Access. And just give you sort of an overview from a traditional publisher. How many folks are familiar with Sage? Does everyone know? Sage, primarily a publisher in the humanities and social sciences. We've been around for almost 50 years, based in Thousand Oaks, California. We're the 5th largest journal publisher in the world. We're very small compared to the other guys, but we publish about 700 journals worldwide. And let's see. I've been around Sage on and off for 20 years. So when I first started in journals, there wasn't online journal publishing. It was all the print thing, and everyone got that. So I've seen a lot of change with the whole online movement. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what is Sage Open, why we launched it, what challenges we faced. We faced different challenges perhaps than Bob did with his business, both in terms of the target audience that we're marketing to, but also just being a traditional subscription publisher, and had to adapt our model to the open access model. And the future of open access at Sage. So what is Sage Open? So broad-based social science and humanities gold open access journal using the PLOS One model. Does everyone know what PLOS One is? Broad science journal that takes in topics all across the range of medicine, science, technology. We thought that was an interesting model to try for the social sciences. So it's based on that model. So we accept anything that could be loosely labeled as social science or humanities article. We first started accepting submissions in January of 2011, so a little over 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years now, and published our first article in May of 2011. We've had more than 2,500 submissions from 62 countries, hundreds of institutions, including UC-Boulder. In 2012, we had 180,000 plus full text downloads, which quite a lot, we think, for just over 100 and something articles that were published at the time. So it's on the Highwire platform from Stanford University Libraries. That's where SAGE journals are housed, so it's on the same platform as all of our journals, and I'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of that in a minute. But so it's not like some cut rate, here's a website, let's throw up a PDF of an article. This is open access publishing. We gave it the full SAGE journal treatment, and that's what it looks like. Exactly like any other SAGE journal. The interesting thing is, of course, there's a little spot up there for where the cover of the journal goes. Since it's an online-only journal, we don't actually have a cover, so we had to make up a cover for it and put it there because the Highwire platform requires that you have a cover go there. So that's a cover that you'll never actually see printed on anything. Otherwise, it looks very much like any other SAGE journal. You have latest articles, browse by subject, podcasts, current highlights. What you don't have is issues. There are no issues for SAGE Open. It's continuous publication. As soon as an article is accepted, it's given a light once over copy edit, and it's published and put up online. So there are no issues. Again, that's what the article looks like when it's drilled down to the actual article itself. Get a little thing up there that says full text PDF open access. Getting those changes into the Highwire template was a lot more difficult than you might think. So I talked a little bit about starting fresh with an open access model, trying to move our current systems into an open access model has proven to be a challenge in a lot of ways, and I'll talk about some more of those in a minute. Submissions by discipline, these are the latest numbers as of September, and they've been pretty consistent since we started. Education has been the #1 discipline, psychology #2, sociology has moved up a little bit. It used to be tied with management, communication, and political science. We don't know what this means, really. We don't know if it means that there is a lot of research going on in education that's not finding an outlet somewhere in a traditional journal. We don't know if it's because SAGE is so well known in the education field that we're attracting a lot of articles that way. Same for psychology. So we're not drawing too many conclusions about why this is yet, but it has been pretty consistent since we started. So where are all those articles? I said we just have published over 300, so we've got thousands of articles. Where the heck are those? The 3,063 number represents articles that have been submitted and resubmitted. So it's a little over what the original one, but this is where they're at. We've got about 80% have been decided. 444 have been accepted. They're in the process of being, like I said, copy edited and being put online. 670 rejected after the article editor, after peer review. Talk a little bit about article editors. When you have a journal that is broad-based, like SAGE Open is, where anything in the social sciences goes, you can't have a single editor over that who oversees it all. So our editorial process is, it's very different than a traditional journal. When an article comes in, we take a look at it. We go to our database of peer reviewers and people who've edited our journals. We've got a huge database of folks who've done that for us over the years. Find someone in there who's published an article that's similar, either by keywords or by subject area, and find someone who's an expert in the field and ask if they will act as the article editor for that particular article. So we take it down, the editorship of the journal, to the actual article itself. Once someone has accepted the article editor role, they then send it out for traditional peer review. 2 or 3 peer reviewers are assigned. The peer reviews come back, and then it's up to the article editor to what to do, whether they accept it, send it back for revision, or just reject it. So we do get rejected articles. I'll show you a chart here in a minute that shows that it's not as high as some of the traditional subscription journals. It's probably not even as high as some of Bob's journals. We publish the journals for the American Educational Research Association, for example. They accept maybe 8% of the articles that are submitted to them. Sage Open, we're probably accepting about 2/3. There's the acceptance rates. Tiny print. Sorry, I tried to make it bigger, and I'm just lame when it comes to PowerPoint, so but it gives you an idea. Most read articles. Wanted to give you an idea of some of the articles that are popular on Sage Open: managing workplace diversity issues and challenges, the effect of training and development, sort of organizational development things, Black teenage pregnancy, a dynamic social problem. Sexy title, I guess. Configuration model of organizational culture, and maternal enmeshment, the chosen child. Across the social sciences, give you an idea of how much each article has been read. Managing workplace diversity, read 30,000 times. I don't know if you've ever published an article or know about how often journal articles are read. That's a lot. That's a whole lot for a journal article. And we think it speaks to the fact that it is open access. So it's gaining traction because it's open access. Second one is 20,000, 15,000, 14,000 and down. One of the things that Bob touched on, and it's new for us at Sage, is article level metrics, because just having an impact factor for a journal is not a good measure of a journal, especially of this type. So we're trying to take it down to the level of the article. It's rudimentary at this point, but you can go and see how many people have read your article and when you've read it, and if people are like looking at it and referring to it in Mendeley, you can see it there. So what are folks saying about Sage Open? We have had 64 respondents to a standard author survey that we send out to everyone at Sage who submits an article to a journal. And 73% said Sage Open was their first choice. That sort of surprised us. But there you have it. 88% said peer review comments were good or excellent. 73% said time to publication from acceptance was good or excellent. Some of the comments, the peer review process was a bit slow despite being an open journal. It can be. There's a perception that, especially with the sciences, that once an article is submitted, that the peer review process is very quick. And I think it is quicker in the sciences. One of the challenges we've found in the social sciences is, especially with this model, is finding someone who will act as the article editor. And once that person has been identified, then putting it through the peer review process. It's a little more time intensive than the sciences, and people get an idea that it should be immediate open access. Publication fees could have been reduced. Talk about that a little bit. This is my first international paper, and I'm delighted to publish with Sage. We're delighted that they could publish with us as well. So why did we launch Sage Open? Well, we know that open access is going to be part of the scholarly communication landscape going forward. That's our business. We don't know how big a part, but we know it's going to be a part. So we needed to get in it. Why Sage Open in the social sciences? It's because our strength and reputation really is in the social sciences. And one of the things that you'll hear in folks talking about open access is they don't know that it's reputable. They don't know the reputation of the journal. Sage has a strong reputation in the social sciences, and we thought that we could bring legitimacy to it for a lot of folks who are questioning. We were also first in the water with this model of open access journal for the social sciences, so that's always a good thing to be. And it's part of our larger mission of service to social science, and that may sound a little sort of self-serving, and who the heck do you think you are, Jim? But Sage is a different kind of a company. It's still privately held by the woman who founded it nearly 50 years ago, Sarah Miller McCune. She has absolutely no intention of ever selling it. She started with one journal, Urban Affairs Quarterly, and has built it into this company that now has 1,300 or 1,400 employees worldwide, 700 plus journals. We see ourselves as sort of between the university presses and the big publishers, like Elsevier's, and we think that we occupy a special niche there, and we try to reflect that in doing things for the social sciences that aren't necessarily going to make any money for us, and open access certainly isn't making any money for us at the moment. So some of the challenges: marketing, editorial, back office, and pricing. They're just less familiar with, the social scientists are just less familiar with open access. It hasn't got the traction that it has had. It's getting traction, it's gaining traction, but it's been a challenge for us. And there's a huge perception of pay to play. When we first launched it and started sending out emails telling folks about it, it's like, why on earth would I want to spend money to have my article published? They thought it was, just like the predatory journals that Bob touched on. So having the Sage reputation behind that, it's still taken some education. Again, there's lots of spam. I don't know if you all get it from some of these publishers, but I get it. I get it. I don't know why I get it, but I'm associated with open access, so I get these solicitations to submit articles. I'm tempted to do it one of these days and just see what happens, but don't have time. Concerns about reputation of the journal and the peer review process. Those are still concerns that we're trying to address. Part of our role, we think, is education, and we do everything we can to go out and talk to folks, and in our marketing, tell folks that the peer review process is legitimate, and trust us, we're Sage, right? So, and that's worked for us. Pricing and payment. There's really no tradition in the social sciences and humanities of including page charges or publishing fees and grants like there is in the sciences. So they're not used to putting money in for that. It may be shifting as more and more funding agencies are saying, yes, you need to publish this open access, but it's still a challenge. Editorial. My tenure committee doesn't count open access publications. I mean, I don't know how many times we've heard that. I don't know if you all hear that here, but it's like there's a blanket. It's like open access. There's no way we're going to count that toward tenure. And we've had people who are full professors who are like trying to move on to the next thing say, this should count. This should count. And having to go back to the tenure committee or the promotion committee and really make a case why an open access journal, even when they show that it's peer reviewed and everything else, should count toward tenure and promotion. The peer review, the broad scope of the journal itself has proven to be a challenge. The article editor model is we've gotten the processes down, but it has certainly proved a challenge for us to get that up and operating well. And again, open access is just less known in the humanities and social sciences. Back office technology challenges, like I mentioned, we just took, it's like, you people probably don't know who Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney are, but okay, I see some nodding heads. We had a barn, so we put on a show, right? We've got this journals platform, so we put up a journal. Well, it has challenges. Continuous publication is one of them. It's not being published as an issue, so there's challenges around how do you cite that. Competitive bells and whistles. Bob's platform has so many more neat little things that has on it that for us to try and get Highwire to do for us. I mean, they're a great partner. Highwire is a terrific partner. They do excellent work. We publish about half the journals that they publish are our journals. Then they publish another 600 or 700 on behalf of other societies. But trying to get that big ship of Highwire to change in the mode of open access when their primary mission is to support subscription journals is certainly a challenge. Systems, subscription, model, the vast majority of transactions just take place electronically. The librarian tells EBSCO or whoever they tell to subscribe to the Sage journals. It all happens, bam, one thing. Hundreds of articles are suddenly available at UC-Boulder. Now it's an author. Each single transaction has to be held, for a journal article, and it's just a very, very different method of business model. Okay, it's about the article, open access, not about the journal. Challenges with pricing. This is an interesting chart for us, and we try to take our lessons from it. In 2011, we announced our pricing. Our list price was $695, which we thought, Bob was saying earlier, it's probably about $1,400 on average for, weren't you saying? You just, yeah. So we thought $700, that's a good price point for folks in the social sciences who aren't used to paying that much for or paying at all, frankly, to publish an article. So the first year we thought, okay, we're going to list price of $695, but we're going to discount it at $195. Terrific. So it takes off. You can see the number of submissions in January when we launched. That's the blue line, and it slowly got down and down. Then in December we announced that we're going to raise the price to $395 starting January 1st. That's where you see the big pop there in the blue line. And we thought, okay, well there's pricing sensitivity here, so we stuck with the $395 price for a while, and you can see that in 2012 the red lines, they were just not really reaching the level of submissions that we had hoped for. So January of 2013 we announced a $99 price. And you can see again the green line, and everybody's happy to pay $99 who weren't happy to pay $395. So it's certainly not a sustainable price for us economically, but we think that it's an investment worth making to get a mass of content. And it's in editorial, it's working out well. We're starting to get a lot of citations, which are important, of course, for any journal. And people are getting used to publishing in an open access publication. So the future of OA at Sage, we launched 3 more Sage Open branded journals this year. Sage Open Medicine, Sage Open Engineering, and Sage Open Medical Case Reports. And we're also planning to launch 40 new journals in 2014. And how the heck do you launch 40 journals? Well, we're doing it in a different model than the traditional, the Sage Open model. We're doing it more a la BioMed Central. We're going to have editors. We're going to partner with societies. And we think that by the end of 2014, we'll have launched another 40 journals in open access. And that's all I have, and I made it in under 1 minute, Bob. Any questions? Hi.
I was wondering with
Oh, do you need the microphone for her? Oh, okay.
For the 74% that said Sage Open was their first choice,
Uh-huh.
do you have any idea whether those are like junior faculty, senior faculty, like what the mix of established career is?
We haven't done a breakdown of that, but UC Berkeley did. They have an open access fund and have had one for a while. And they took a look at who was using that fund. And about half were what they called emerging scholars. So they were, fresh PhD candidates and not necessarily tenure track yet, and grad student and above level. So, but the other half were folks who were, already tenured or working on tenure track. So we haven't done that analysis yet, unfortunately. Anyone else? Yes?
I have a question, actually, could go to either of you.
Okay.
So you both mentioned the predatory open access journals,
Uh-huh.
Which is obviously on a lot of people's minds now.
Oh, Hannon.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So I guess my question is, speaking of Bohannon, right? So we have some publishers who are doing, it seems like, going to great lengths to bring predatory open access publishers to the forefront, and kind of, I think, inflating the problem potentially. Are either of your organizations doing anything to sort of make public statements about kind of the points that you guys are making? These are outliers. This is a natural thing that happens whenever you have sort of a new business model emerging. there any efforts maybe among publishers of getting together of the good open access publishers to take an effort to make some kind of public statement to help sort of reverse the PR spin that's happening?
There's an organization called OASPA, the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association, and that organization has for a long time been trying in a nice, reasoned, rational way to address the whole issue of predatory publishing and the effects that it has in not only the open access environment, just in scholarly publishing in general. And Springer, I think, and I'm happy to say that both BioMed Central and Springer turned the Bohannon article down. Yahoo! Has put out a statement. I think that our stance is that we have to recognize it's a serious issue. We have to respect that different people are going to have a different viewpoint on this. The popular press loved this Bohannon article. I mean, I get have a Google alert for certain things, and boy, the press all over the world jumped all over this because it made for a great headline. And when you dig deeper, what you're actually seeing is something that is not new to publishing. It's gone back over 100 years. There have been people, when I was in the book selling community, the Gillies, the father and son in St. Clair Shores, Michigan, would promote these beautiful sounding, really nicely described reference works that they would offer this great pre-pub offering. If you paid $695, the Encyclopedia of X, as soon as it comes out, it's going to be yours. Well, they never published any of these things. And they just took the money and ran and set up a new imprint about 6 months later and did it again and did it again. They actually did prison time. And when they got out, they started doing it all over again to get it passed off. Well, it didn't mean that all reference publishing was suspect. What it meant was that whether it's a library buying content or it's a researcher submitting content, caveat emptor, do your homework, let the buyer beware. And I think also there are some very positive things. For those that don't know, this guy Bohannon made up an article that purposely had some bad science in it. And then submitted to like 300 open access journals, just open access journals. So he didn't see what the results would be with subscription-based journals. And then tracked the results. And a phenomenal number of the publishers submitted to that included ones that popularly are identified as predatory through things like Jeffrey Beall's list down at UC, or down at University of Denver. Or more established journals that something like 165 of them accepted the article. Oh my God. And the good news is, I think, about all that when the dust finally settles on this, it was a real good wake-up call for publishers and for researchers that the publishers, if you say you're a reputable company, you got to make sure that your peer review process isn't getting lazy. If you're a submitting author, you have to do your homework, that you're submitting to the right place. And if you're a predatory publisher, be aware that the world is trying to find out who you are and put you out of business.
One of the challenges, I think, for librarians is informing the faculty about what is a reputable journal and what isn't a reputable journal in this crazy world. Because what a lot of these predatory journals will do is they'll just take people's names off of websites, and these are reputable people, and just attach them without their permission to these journals. So someone in chemistry sees someone with a big name and it's like, oh, this person, awesome, this person is associated with it. Well, no, they're not really associated with it. So communicating that to your faculty and to your students is I think, going to be a challenge going forward. Sage got caught up in it. We got caught in it. One of the journals that we bought about 1.5 years ago accepted it to the technical edit stage, and that's the point at which payment is triggered for this particular journal. Our position is that it wouldn't have made it through the technical edit stage beyond that. But we watched very carefully the peer review process of all the journals that we publish, because one bad apple can just ruin the whole bunch. So the most interesting thing about that article was that there was a line in there that said industry titans, Sage, and someone else, and I'm like, wow, I work for an industry titan now. I thought I worked for Sage, but now we're industry
Every cloud
titans.
has a silver lining.
I could hear the CEO dancing. I'm an industry titan now. But yeah, it's a complicated issue. We got caught, but there was no surprise at who most of the other journals were. There were people who were on Beal's list. Has he ever come and spoke here to you? Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I was on a panel with him in May. He's just down the road. You might want to ask him next year. So,
When BioMed Central first launched, largely driven by the big traditional publishers, there was so much brouhaha and misinformation about open access. Oh, this is vanity publishing. I got an article, I got to check, I'm going to get published. Totally ignoring the fact that very stringent peer review standards were being adhered to by us and by other reputable companies that were like PLOS and Hindawi that were moving into us. That you're going to ruin your reputation, that if you're a society journal and you move to an open access platform, you're going to go out of business, you can't possibly. And all this stuff proved not to be true. So as you get these periodical events where whatever, I think some people are heartfelt in their concerns, some people are just see things in black and white, and if it's not purely something, it must be bad, and they express views that way. And other people may have ulterior motives to wanting to suppress the success of open access. You're going to get these kind of wows in the system where there's a whole bunch of commentary, and some of it that's very useful, and some of it over time that is less useful. The fact of the matter is, I'm hard-pressed to believe that there are circumstances out there that are going to bring open access to a screeching halt. And so things like this are just good reminders, I think, once you drill down below, was this really good science on Bohannon's part or wasn't it? And you can make a case either way. Underneath it all, I think it probably was not the worst thing in the world. It's kind of like when you see somebody's brakes fail and it's something bad happened to somebody else. If you go home and have your own brakes examined, maybe something in the long run good comes out of this because everybody's focusing more attention instead of getting complacent about all the things that are necessary to provide good, really thoughtful, meaningful research to the world in a way that doesn't cause harm.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm more interested in, well, I guess one of the things that was really attractive when all this open access started gaining momentum was how it might change the review process, how that might become more open itself. And you spent a lot of time talking about this commitment to adhering to the old methods, and I'm wondering if there's any interest or development on either of these companies towards a more open review process.
Certainly there's interest in, we have comments where people can make comments when we make that available. Nobody makes comments on the articles.
Right.
So, having open review of something requires people to actually go and look at it and do a review or comment on it. Are we open to it? Yeah, but I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. PeerJ, I don't know if you're familiar with PeerJ, but it's Pete Benfield, who used to work for Sage and was the publisher of PLOS One as it became a great, big, huge success, left PLOS One and founded PeerJ, which offers $99 membership to people, and they can publish for the rest of their lives, a lifetime membership. But one of the things that they require is that you do peer review for them. So but it's still peer review. It's still peer review. And I think that the Bohannon article probably says as much about peer review. If he had tried to do the same thing with a cohort of non-open access journals, he probably would have gotten into a number of those as well. So, but we'll never know.
There are some folks who are experimenting with open peer review, where you do, in some cases, you do a very preliminary read through to catch blatant errors, if you will. and then put it out and let others in the community, that discipline, comment openly. I think, if I understand correctly, eLife is actually putting things out before publication and kind of letting, I'm going to call it crowdsourced peer reviewing, let people comment in an open environment directly back to the author, who then can take their comments to heart if they want to and make revisions and put it out. And when the community kind of decides, hey, this is done now, this is acceptable, publishing it. We have taken a few of our journals, and we're in fact, we are experimenting with things like that. We want to know if there's viability in taking advantage of some of these open peer review processes that will meet the interest and needs of the researchers without compromising the end product. And so we're not on a broad scale, but on a selective scale, we're trying to participate in that to find out what we can learn about that process.
So I'm a music theorist and published or coordinated the publishing of an ebook this summer that involves some non-anonymous peer review, not quite open peer review, and I'm working on a project with a colleague here who's editor of our professional society's open access journal on an open peer review project. And in both cases, the authors, the readers don't pay anything. I paid a grand total of $7 for a domain name, so we didn't have a big long string of stuff. We published with GitHub because they allow for the publication of websites. If it's open access or open license in any way, it's a free host that's very, very stable and reliable, and it's a good collaborative working environment. So I'm wondering, in the costs that you guys have given the authors, and I'm wondering where that money goes and if it's necessary, because in my discipline we almost always publish through professional societies or university presses, and for the open access material, we've had an open access journal for 20 years in our professional society. They never charged anyone, and so I'm wondering what that money is for.
Well, they did charge somebody. They charged it in their membership fees. They have to host a server. That didn't come free. They have to buy hardware to do that and have IT people and editors and an accounting department or whatever.
No, I'm on the networking committee, so I know who does what.
Right. Okay.
It's not that much, yeah.
But the point, if you host something for free on a server that the university runs on your behalf, well, the university, somewhere somebody paid for something. And so in the private sector, where you don't have endowments or grant funds, then the heating the building, the hiring the editors, the having an accounting department, the having an ITPT department. We have 300 direct employees in London running BioMed Central, but we also have some folks that help us that are, I think in the Philippines, that help us process invoices and that kind of stuff. There is a cost structure to running any organization. As long as somebody is willing to pay the bill, then you can, on the individual user basis, you can keep it at $7. We don't have that luxury. We also have a mandate, we feel, to continue to publish in areas that are emerging, and so where you may not be looking to expand your portfolio of books or journals that you're doing personally in music theory, we're always trying to reach more into the research community and provide services. In order to do that, we have to have a revenue stream for that. So it's if the U.S. government would write us a check and say, here's $5 million, make it free to everybody for a full year, we'd say sure. But the fact is, every organization has some underlying costs that are covered by somebody. And in our case, there's just more direct link between deriving the revenue and what we pay for than perhaps the environment that you're able to, on an individual smaller scale basis, able to publish in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how much smaller we are. I mean, I know we're a pretty small discipline, but I was just looking at the analytics for our ebook. I mean, we published early August. Early September, in multiple universities had placed it on their pedagogy courses or their graduate training as required reading. And he's already out there just by sending emails and tweets and Facebook posts. And we've got almost 10,000 page views now for a dozen articles, which came out 2 months ago. I mean, that's pretty good for not paying anything. And so in this case, we pay zero for the hosting because it's an open project that's subsidized by paid projects on that company's server. But we have free access to that, and the way it's set up, we can move that easily if we need to. And so I'm just wondering what the value is going through a publisher if you're doing open access or open source publishing. When a professional society can decide we're going to get behind this, or university library or department decide we're going to get behind this, and all you need is the cost of a web host, which for a single journal is peanuts or less, right? Especially if you already have that infrastructure and you're just adding, a gigabyte or two for the year. So I guess I'm asking, do we need you as politely as possible?
It's a good question.
Well, and if you have a society and dedicated people who are willing to do the work and all of that, and that's fantastic, and you can do that for no cost. What Bob described is the publishing industry as is now. I mean, Sage is a small company. We have a very nice big building, and we have a CEO who sits in an office with an assistant, and we have a legal department, and we have a customer service department, and we publish books too. So it's not all just journals, and a lot of the profits that we go to fund our books that don't make a profit, and we have all of this infrastructure that's not related to open access. That if you could just blow it up, you might be able to do it like you're talking about. And that's, I don't want to keep harping on Peer J, but Pete Benfield said, people are asking, how can you sustain this at $99? It's like, well, I work from home. We don't have a legal department because it's all CC BY. We don't have to negotiate anything. We don't have permissions that we have to negotiate. We don't have, everything's done electronically in terms of collecting payment. So they don't have all of that infrastructure built in. So it can be done much less expensively than traditional publishers can. On the other hand, when you come with a traditional publisher, you get the brand. So you get the Sage brand. Not that there's anything wrong with the brand of your society, but it is a larger brand. How it's going to all end up, I don't know. There's going to be more stuff like what you're doing. There's going to be more stuff like what we're doing. There's going to be more stuff like what he's doing. What it all ends up being, I have no idea.
I think the answer is all of the above. I used to work for another British company, and one of my boss's favorite terms is horses for courses. Depends on what your outcome. Do you want to just get something published? Any of us can go home and use open journal source publishing and put out a journal. If you want to produce a journal, it's a very straightforward thing to do. If you can write your own content. If that's the desired outcome, is just putting something out, then you're absolutely right. If you have to put something out that fits into a larger context that says, where the reason you're really publishing this is to be recognized enough that you can get a grant to do further research in microbiology, you may want to publish in an environment that has some other structure or rigors to it, so you can then go back to that granting agency and say, I didn't just get published, I got published in this journal, and what the community has said is the value of that journal is in fact my reason for publishing, not just to put something out there.
Does that have to do with the publisher's brand, or does that have to do with people editing that journal? Because
it's both.
Our society's open access journal is routinely held as one of the top 5 journals in the field. It has no brand other than Music Theory Online by the Society's Music Theory.
And I think that's fantastic. And if in fact you offer a viable route for people who are going to gain however they define benefit from that, at very low cost to them and very low cost to you, that's great. I'm living in an environment where, as I said, we have to figure out a way how to manage, even though we don't personally, how to manage the peer review this year of 60,000 articles. There's some cost to that. That's not you sitting at home, you know, working with some people online and having some conference calls and producing a book or a journal. It's a very different scale that has some very real costs associated with it. That's not to say that some researcher should have to publish with us. One of the things I like about the fact that I've had open access, not my company, but open access accused of wanting to take over the world. Well, in fact, I don't think we want to, because we already lived in that environment before where everything was subscription based and no alternatives and you had no choices. The environment works better when people can choose to go with a Sage subscription journal, a Springer subscription journal, our open access journals, your society approach. As many options as are open is the healthiest environment for getting information out in ways that will meet a variety of needs. Some of those have a cost structure that's different than others. People in sales, it's called the value proposition. And if the value proposition is better going your route than our route, then by all means people should have the right to do so and shouldn't be penalized. But on a personal basis, we do it all the time. I could buy a Yugo if I wanted to, but I bought a Honda because they're both cars, but one of them had value to me and the other one didn't. So I paid more for it. It's kind of, that's a very simplistic analogy, but it's kind of the same sort of process.
Can you really still buy a Yugo?
I don't know. Not even used yet. I'm glad you were paying attention, Jim.
I put this slide back up just to show you. These are examples of societies who are doing open access journals. The Orthopedic Journal of Sports Medicine is by the American Orthopedic Society of Sports Medicine. They publish a journal with us called the American Journal of Sports Medicine. That's a subscription journal. Many societies, especially big medical societies, have journals that they make a great deal of money off of. So they're loath to lose that revenue, whereas your society is like more service-oriented, it sounds like. Not to say that they're not service-oriented, but they came of age in a different model and in a different field than what you all in the humanities do. So I don't know why I'm saying that other than to say it's just not the big mean publishers who are charging lots of money for stuff. But if you want to get published in the Orthopedic Journal of Sports Medicine, it's going to be about $1,500. And that's as a basis of their brand. So, but kudos to you and congratulations.
Absolutely.
But over 20 years, you've built that brand. So it has become the fifth most important journal in your field. So someone spent time and effort doing that. So congratulations. No, but to your society and to the folks who foresaw that. Great discussion. Any other questions or thoughts?
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, to kind of not necessarily stay on that topic, but follow up then, what is the major cost with these open access? Is it still the editorial process or is it something besides that?
It's personnel, it's infrastructure, it's there's a certain amount of profit margin, it's research and development, it's just running an organization. It's, let's look at the university, same sort of thing. Why should I send my kid to this university when I can, he or she can get the same bachelor's degree in English from this little Christian college 100 miles from here at like a third of the cost? What's the deal? Well, at the end of the day, people have these criteria, one of which may be I want to have not just a bachelor's degree, but I want a bachelor's degree from an Ivy League school or a Big Ten school or from the University of Colorado that has intrinsic value. And for some reason, funding all the buildings and programs and all the, and personnel, you folks included, that goes into that, Colorado said, here's in fact what we have to charge for you to attend here. And another university may say, that's fine, and here's what we have to charge, and it may be more and maybe less. When on the surface, it's all the quote unquote the same thing, but it's not.
Well, and what we have now is a real marketplace where authors can say, I only want to spend $99. And, Peer J, that's got a reputation, it's building. I'm not going to submit to a BioMed Central journal because they want to charge me $1,500. I'm going to do it there. So there's a real competition in the marketplace for the first time for scholarly journals, because up till now it's like, okay, you want all the SAGE journals, you get all the SAGE journals, but not really competing against Elsevier because you got to get all the Elsevier journals too. So the price, what you guys charge, what we charge is going to be set by the market, what the market will bear. And that's going to be a more accurate reflection of the value that we bring. And you folks will decide what that value is.
To kind of follow or push back a little is so you had an example of lowering the price of submissions for
Mhm.
SAGE journals so that you would build a base of content that you can rely on or build a reputation in, right? I mean, that sort of same idea can be pushed, but instead of just building a reputation again in the same old model, you would then try to push for a new model that costs less. I mean, so I'm not really sure where I'm going to try and end up with this, but basically that the investment, so the general idea is that the model, that the economic model is changing for publishers, and that you guys are trying to find a way to make open access work for you, and that might cost some money up front, but I think what I'm trying to get is that it might be, do you guys feel a responsibility to change your economic model to make this open access work, or is it more of a trying to maintain an economic model in the face of this open access?
It's both, I think. I think we're not, one of the things, when you're an open access publisher, your relationship is with the researcher. You take the individual very seriously. You make sure that you provide he or she with really responsive and useful peer review and commentary and answer to questions, and it really gets you out of this whole thing of, oh, well, you know, we have this package and we're Springer, so everybody's got to buy our content. You can't get lazy for a moment. I am told, I believe it's still the case, Nature has Nature Communications, which is kind of this open plus one sort of thing. Their article processing charge is $5,000. And people line up to do it because it's really hard to get into, because at the end of the day, if you're in the science community, you can say me and nature in the same sentence, that opens doors. Now, I don't like the idea of $5,000 APC, but that's their business. We are not insensitive to the marketplace, but the fact that this year we're going to get 60,000 people to voluntarily submit, actually it's more people, 60,000 articles submitted to us, must mean that somebody in the external environment says, yeah, this has value. I'm comfortable with this. And if they aren't, they can go to PLOS or PeerJ or SAGE, or depending on the discipline, or other places that we don't have a monopoly. I think it's great that a model that's 13 years old, we're already talking about kind of how old and staid it might be and how really in need of rejuvenation it is. And last year at Charleston, I referred to BioMed Central as the traditional open access publisher, because now, hey, we're a dozen years old. And that's how quickly things move. It took 200 years to get to open access to start, and in less than 15 years we're already talking about, gee, we need to re-examine the model and maybe start poking it and prodding it and tweaking it. That's great.
Is there some false economics in there, possibly, though, that the idea that we have competition and people find value in this and so they're paying for that? Because the people who get the biggest value out of this, as you're, I think, demonstrating, as the cost shifts to the author, it's the author. The author needs the CV line so they can get tenure, right? And so the author is going to pay. But the people deciding what is worth paying for is not the people making the payment. It's the people on the committees, or at least the author's perception of what the committee wants. And that's not exactly fair, free market.
Our world, our global world would be so much different if tenure was either eliminated or different than it is. And underlying so much of what goes on in scholarly publishing is tied to getting tenure and getting grants. If those things weren't there, this might look, and very likely would look, really different. But the fact is, I don't know, do you guys perceive that either of those things are falling by the wayside? Because until they do, some of these underlying external environmental conditions that are beyond the control of any publisher or any individual researcher are still at the core of so many transactions.
Right. Now, you could change tenure in that process, or you could convince senior scholars in specific universities or disciplines or scholarly societies that something has value. Because if you convince the senior people in your school and in your department that this is a valuable thing, then it doesn't matter, the process changes because you can make use of that new valuable thing. So if you can convince those people that believe open access just shouldn't count for tenure, if you can convince them it counts for tenure, then all of a sudden you don't have to pay to get into these 5 things, because now there's these other 5 over here that you can be part of. So it's not just we're stuck with this infrastructure in the system. If we can convince senior scholars in those fields that this is valuable, then those of us on the junior side can go that route as well.
I think you have a real challenge there, convincing senior scholars of that. I think that as you gain seniority, that you're going to bring that to the fore. I think that's just the way academia works. It just is a very, very, very slow boat to change course. And frankly, publishers are able to exploit that. So, but you're right. I mean, it's your doing. It's the tenure committee who's saying, no, you can't publish. You have to publish in, business is the worst. It's like they've got like a list of 10 journals that come out in the FT. It's like you have to publish there if you want it to get promoted or tenure. Those 10 journals, and it's like everyone is trying to get into those 10 journals. That's beyond our control. That's up to you guys.
The number of senior faculty, they're still out there that say if it's open access, we can't even look at it as legitimate scholarship. They're in the minority. And as younger researchers come up in an environment that they were not born subscription-based researchers, it's falling by the wayside. In the sciences, we're seeing very clearly that open access or not, it comes down to the journal. Is it a good journal? Is it reputable? Does it enhance the reputation of this person? And we've largely, by adhering to high standards, pushed a lot of that argument to the side where people are saying, let's look at the journal itself. It doesn't matter whether it started open access or it was subscription-based. And that's one of the real underlying dangers and issues of these predatory publishers, is they're starting to poison the well again. And we got to, in the interest of both publishers and researchers and libraries, we have to, to the extent that it's possible, it's like trying to catch hackers. We're trying to figure out what jurisdiction do we have for people who are operating in India or Azerbaijan and doing these things. I don't know, but the sooner we put a lid on those guys, then the more we can get back to the matter at hand, which is good, reputable, high-level scholarship, whether it's from a society or it's a subscription-based publisher or it's open access publisher.
Really good discussion. Thank you.
Thanks to you all. And thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.